Okay, we may as well make a start, I think. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know it's such a busy time of year for everyone, so we really appreciate you making the time and effort to be here today. Today's webinar is designed as a practical introduction to the AIA Accounting Platform, and hopefully it gives you a really clear picture of what the platform does, how it works, and how you might use it to support future decisions. I'd love to warmly welcome the team from AIA and agricultural consultant Cam Nicholson, and thank them for joining us today to take you through the platform and its capabilities. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. I think we'll have some time for questions at the end, but we do have the Q&A function open, so feel free to pop things in there as we go, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. There is also a survey at the end, so I'd really appreciate if you could take the time to complete that. But otherwise, I'll hand it over to Sarah and Cam to get started.
Thanks, Alicia. I'll just take you through some really basic information about what the EAP is, why you should be using it, and how it can help you with understanding your on-farm emissions. And then I'll be handing over to the fabulous Cam Nicholson, who will be taking us through a demonstration of the platform itself and how you enter your data and how you end up with an emissions report. So firstly, probably wanted to start with why would you need to know your emissions number? Probably the most important is the link between emissions and on-farm efficiency and productivity. Knowing your emissions can help you identify inefficiencies and also help you understand how to optimise your input use. Some of the other drivers relate to things like supply chains, so they're starting to request this type of information from producers. It can also help with access to green finance or green loans through some of the lenders that are offering those. And for other commodities, market access is an issue too. The most important thing is to have a go at calculating your emissions and getting comfortable with your number and what it means for your business. As Cam says, when his clients do their numbers, most of them realise that they're actually stacking up really well. So the important part is to give it a go. So what is the Environmental Accounting Platform? Well, it's a free online tool for calculating your on-farm GHG emissions across multiple commodities. You can use the EAP to do a number of things. You can use it to understand your emissions at both a commodity and a whole of enterprise level. You can use it to establish your baseline, and you can also use it to scenario plan to support your on-farm decisions. Using the EAP, you should be confident using the EAP because of a number of things. It's backed by industry, so it was built with investment from GRDC and 9 of the other research and development corporations. We were one of the first 10 products or services to be awarded certification under the NFF's Australian Farm Data Code, which means you can have confidence in how your data is being managed. We don't share your data. If you need help with managing your emissions or completing adding your inputs into the EAP, you can invite your agronomist, your advisor, or your employees to actually help you edit those inputs or view your emissions report. With the EAP, you are always in full control of your data. You can share it with anyone that you choose, and you can download, store, or share your emissions report in multiple ways. The EAP uses the model chosen by the Australian government as the authoritative source on how to estimate GHG emissions at the farm level, and that is the University of Melbourne's Greenhouse Accounting Framework tools. You may be familiar with those. The other really key thing here is AIA is a not-for-profit company. So we were actually established by all 15 of the rural research and development corporations. Calculating your emissions with the EAP is really simple, and Cam's going to show you how simple that is shortly. It uses information that you already have on hand. A lot of that information perhaps you've got when you're doing your tax returns. So that type of information includes general property details, things like planting area and yields, your fertiliser and chemical use, electricity usage from things like your power bills, as well as data on fuel consumption. The other great thing about the environmental accounting platform is that if you're a mixed farming enterprise, you can calculate your emissions across all your commodities together in the one place. It also shows you both a commodity view of your emissions as well as a whole of enterprise view of your emissions. If you need help, you can visit our website and you can access a full suite of resources. That includes a grains input checklist, as well as a step-by-step user guide. These resources were developed in collaboration with GRDC. And finally, getting started. So once you've collated the information that you need to calculate your emissions, you can set up an EAP account. So you just need to visit our website and click on the log on button. You'll enter your email address and then you'll receive an email verification code. So this happens each time you log into the EAP to keep it nice and secure. A couple of tips: you might take a few minutes to receive that email, and always check your junk or spam mail just in case if it hasn't come through. Once you enter that code and click continue, you can now set up your account and you're ready to go. So I'll hand over to Cam in a minute, but if you have any questions, you can obviously find more information on our website, or you can send us through an email. Happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you. Over to you, Cam.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. What I'd like to do now is just take you very quickly through the functionality of the platform. A couple of things I'll add is, and I think it's fair to say, Sarah, it's a work in progress. So there is continual improvement and continual ways of making the platform, if you like, more user-friendly and adding other features to it. So there'll be some features that I will highlight, but I won't take you through because they've really sort of been put there as the platform evolves further and other potentially environmental accounting beyond carbon becomes an issue for us to have to try and maybe report on in the future. So the functionality has been built into this platform that can do much more than just the carbon accounting side of it. So I'll share my screen, and it's a bit gutsy whenever you do this because you're doing something live and you hope that things don't fall apart on you. But as Sarah said, the way it works is you set up a login and you set up an account. So I've got an account over here, and the first page or the first screen that you go to is where you set up your properties. Now, for most people, they may only have one property, but this has the functionality of being able to put multiple properties and report and blend those together as you see fit for the reporting that you want to do. So you can have properties in different states, properties 5 k's apart, and you can either treat them as the same one property or you can treat them as independent properties. So this is the first thing that comes up. Before I show you how to start a new property or enter a new property, I just want to take you to the button on the right hand side here, which says accounts. And this is what Sarah alluded to, this idea of being able to share. So there are 3 tabs in the account section. One is my profile. So this is of the person that set it up and the email and things like that. And you can delete that or change that as you see fit. The second one, which is important though, is the My Teams. And the My Teams allows you, with this button up here of invite members, to invite other people to either contribute to the data that's there or view that data, verify that data, and so on. So it might be that you want to invite your agronomist to be able to contribute to it as well, or the accountant who might be doing, say, your BAS statements, and therefore they're handling your fuel bills and your electricity bills, that someone else could be entering some of that data if you give them permission to do so. And so Fiona and my wife and I both have permission here to be able to contribute and do things to this. The other 3 down here are just some of the developers of the platform that we've been helping out with. And the third one I just want to show you there is the My Organisation one. This is where you have to consent to sharing your information. And so as Sarah said, if you don't wish to share your individual information and allow that to be passed on to a third party, then unless you tick the box to consent to that, it won't happen, but this is where you do it. And the flip side of that is if you've put information in there and say, I would like to get rid of that, I never want anybody to ever see it again, if you press the button there, request bulk data deletion, it will go in and it will clear, or AI will clear all of your information off their website, so it's not there stored. So you lose all the information if you choose to do that. But as Sarah said, you've got very strong control over your data.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. I just might qualify that consent is actually for de-identified aggregated data. So at no time do we even ask for access to your identifiable data, just to clear that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so message is you're in control of your data unless you choose to share it, is the key thing there. And there's another one here which I'll come back to a little bit later. So I just wanted to show that to start with, because those 3 tabs I think are very important to give you a bit of confidence about how it works, who you can share it with, and so on. All right, if we jump into the bulk of it, as I said, we've got these different properties. If I want to add a property, it's as simple as you just click on there and it says new property. And if you look over here to the right, you can put the property details in. So I'm just going to put BCG, so Birchip Cropping Group, could be the name of this one here. And then it asks you what types of enterprises, because as Sarah said, you can put multiple enterprises. So you could be doing cropping, you could have a sheep operation, you could have a beef operation, and you could have a piggery, and you can put all of them in this one platform together. So this is where you can first set that up. So in this case here, I'm going to make it really simple. We're just doing cropping grains. And so when I click on that, all it does is bring in all the information that's relevant to grain farming. But you could put multiple ones of those in as well. Okay, then it allows you to select parcels of where your farm is. And I'm zoomed into here because this is our account and our farm. So I'm just going to click on a couple of parcels here. So if you just click on individual parcels like that, you can very quickly build up the shape of this property or the size of the property. You don't at this stage necessarily need to have this to do the accounting, but it is useful in some of the other features that the platform's got. I better turn that one off because that's not ours. Okay, so there's just 3 blocks that I've said. These are some cropping blocks around where we are that we're farming. It picks up the regional address from where you are. It asks one other key question, and this is around leaching through the soil profile, and it's highly relevant for the amount of nitrogen that's lost out of the system. Nitrogen being, when it turns into nitrous oxide, is a greenhouse gas. And so there is a function in there about how much of that nitrogen that you put on your paddock actually is lost from your paddock. In this case here, because we're doing a Birchip one, and the rough rule of thumb is if it's above 600 millimetres a year rainfall, then you may get some leaching. Where below that, we just tick on no. You can change this if it changes from season to season, but in most cases, you tick off no, and then it does all these functions in the background for you. So once you're happy with that, you can put your address and all that stuff in if you like. You just press confirm. And so what it's done then is just create a new property called BCG. Okay, and in this property here, then we have 4 functions on the left-hand side. One where we can draw, it's called map shapes. So if you wanted to, and this is designed very forward thinking, is that if, say, you wanted to map out tree plantations or remnant vegetation or areas that were specifically cropping and areas that were specifically grazing, you can draw shapes on this, you can draw paddocks on this, you can draw a whole lot of things and associate various activities with it. I reckon if you're first starting, I wouldn't worry too much about being that specific until you get the hang of how it works. So I'm going to sort of park that function for a bit, but I can see in the future how that one's going to be highly relevant to some of the other reporting that we may have to do. The main one is the business activities, and this is where you enter your data for the different activities that you've got. The products and commodities we don't have to worry about. That's mainly for people that actually do a further level of processing beyond primary production as part of the farming business. So that might be people that are in horticulture and stuff like that, that are they're packing and doing other things with commodities. And then the last button there will do your analysis at the end once you've entered that data. So main function to look at is the business activities. So let's just click on that. Business activities comes up with just a simple screen like this. One is where you put your enterprise and your management, land management in there. Then there's a second lot that asks for the energy and commodities that you consume or that you buy in. And then if you've got multiple enterprises, you can enter them as a bulk thing, and then you can spread them across different enterprises. At the moment, we've only got one enterprise here in grain, so that will make it a bit simpler. But you could imagine if you had cropping and you had your livestock and you had your piggery and so on, you'd have a number of these listed down here. So to enter data is pretty simple. You just go to the Add tab, and then it asks you, and this is optional, the name of the crop, but sometimes that's useful. So let's say if we were just thinking about wheat, but we might be growing APW wheat and we might be growing red wheat as well, and you want to separate those two out because the regimes that you're using as far as fertilizer and chemical and things are different on them, you can separate them out and find the relevant information for each of those. But at the moment, let's say we're just doing APW wheat. That's what we'll call this one, and that we've got in there. And then it asks you for a start and an end date. Now, the way it's set up at the moment, and commonly when we're doing emissions reporting, it's on an annual basis, so it's over a 12-month period. So this is set up at the moment to run for a 12-month period. You can pick whatever start date you like, but then it defaults to a 12-month calendar as part of that. And so depending on when it makes sense for you to think this is how I track my year, I would recommend that's where your starting date is. So if it was the start of the calendar year, start of the financial year, or in a case like your cropping one, you might say 1st of April is when we think about seeding, and therefore that's where we'll start from. So I'm going to say we're going to start from April, and I'm going to try and set up a 12-month period here to go through to March of 2026. Now, obviously, we haven't got to March 2026, so I'm actually going to cheat here. I'll go back to 2024 and enter it in as though it's April 2024, and then it says the end date is March 2025. So it's a 12-month period, but it basically picks up your from seeding, if that's a logical time for you to start collecting and entering this sort of data, and takes you through that 12-month period. So as soon as you've set that up, you've actually set up your calendar for the year, and you just save that. And then it asks you some questions around this individual business activity, which is your APW wheat. How many hectares did we plant? And let's say we planted 250 hectares of that. Now you can see the little button there that says manage on map. If you want to, when you click on that, you could actually put on the map where that APW wheat was grown. I'm saying to start with, I wouldn't worry about that too much. You can still get all the other functions out of it, but it does allow you to pinpoint some areas where certain activities have been happening. It asks you for the crop type, and in this case here it's wheat. So we scroll down to wheat. And the reason for that is it's a whole lot of functions about how wheat behaves and what emissions come from wheat growing and things like that that are automatically entered into it. And then it says what was the yield of that crop. So at the end of the year, what was the yield of that crop? Now you can either enter that and say it was 500 tonnes, or you can say, I don't know, total tonnes, but let's say it was 3 tonne a hectare is on average what that crop grew, and it will automatically calculate the total yield of that. It asks if that crop was irrigated, because that has a bit to do with leaching, and it asks you, what did you do with the residue? Did you burn it? So basically, are we burning our stubbles? And I've said here no, but you can just click on yes or no. If you click on yes, it says what percentage of that 250 hectares did you burn, because you may not have burnt all of it. So it gives you the option to shift that around. So we'll just say no for that at the moment. And the same with irrigation. If you tick it on, it changes the way the nitrogen leaches through the profile. So it's basically as simple as that. Just have to move people's heads out of the way, sorry. And then down on the bottom left-hand corner is the save button. And if you hit the save button, that will enter that bit of information in. Okay, and then we can go back to the next step. So the first step is what's your planting area and your yield. Your next step was how was the soil improved. This is basically where you put your fertilizer and your limes in. So I'm assuming here that we're not going to put any lime in, but it's pretty straightforward. It uses the same approach of the fertilizer. So let's say for that fertilizer that we're putting on here, name of the application. So this could be our sowing fert. You can call it whatever you like in that. Month of application, well, that would have gone in April, because that's when we were sowing. And let's say we used MAP. So you put MAP in there, and then it enters in the different levels of nutrients that's in there, and how much did we use. So let's say we use 70 kilos a hectare at sowing for that MAP.
Cam, did that need to be
Yes.
April 2024?
Sorry, yes, it does. Thank you. April 2024. Okay. Month of application, and then you put in your total amount applied. If so, it's going to assume now that we did that over 250 hectares. If you hadn't and you'd only used that amount over part of that APW wheat, you can click on there and you can actually split that up of how many hectares received that amount of fertilizer, because it's doing a calculation in the background to say there was 250 hectares by 70 kilos. It's working out the total quantity of that fertilizer that you've used. If you're happy with that one, okay, we'll put that one in as our first fertilizer, and then it says save and add another, which I've clicked on. And let's say we use some urea top dress. And this might be our first one that we've put in, and we put that on in June to get our tillering set up right. So that's a bit of urea. So we'll click on a bit of urea there. And let's say we put 50 kilos a hectare on that one. And I've got that wrong again. So it's June 2024. Save and add another. Let's say we put a second top dressing on. Urea top dress 2. So obviously you can call these whatever makes sense to you. And we might have put that one on in August of 2024. So that's a second one once we've got past GS30. And again, we use a bit of urea, and you can choose any of these fertilizers. What it's doing in the background is working out what the emissions to create that fertilizer are, and what the emissions when potential losses occur with those different types of fertilizers. And let's say we've used another 50 kilos of urea on that one. And if we're happy with that, and I'm doing this really quickly because there might be other applications of other things that you've put on, but we'll just leave it those 3. So it's now created those 3 in a list, so you can track over time. You can be entering this during the year. You don't have to wait for the end of the year to do this. And I say to my clients, it's useful to do it every 3 months. I'll say when you're doing your BAS, just update these because you're probably looking at some of the numbers anyway. If you wanted to edit any of them, you just go to the little pencil button and you just click on that, and it will take you back into those details that you've already entered. And you might say, oh, it wasn't 70, it was 80. So you can go back and edit that. And either cancel, save, or go back. If you want to delete it because it's totally wrong, just press the red delete button and it will disappear. But I'll leave it at that for the moment.
For Cam or Sarah, and Wendy's wondering if there is a way to integrate with AgWorld for inputs.
Yes, thanks, Wendy. Wendy, I think if I remember correctly, you're actually using the API, so we can probably have a discussion about that probably offline. So the 2 questions that you've got in there relate more to the API usage than using this front-end online calculator.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. All right, so that's the second one. And then the third one is your chemical use. And it's the same. So if you saw the process of putting the fertilizer one in, it's the same process for your chemicals. The only trick with the chemical one is that the calculations are done on active ingredient and not on quantity of chemical used. So there's sort of a couple of steps to make sure that we get this right. Otherwise, if you just said that everything was 100% concentrate, then your emissions associated with your herbicides are going to be higher, or your fungicides are going to be higher than what they would be otherwise. So let's make this really simple. We know we use quite a number of different herbicides, but let's say in this case here, to make it really simple, we just used a bit of glyphosate at the start. So we used a bit of Roundup at the start. It's saying here that our active ingredient in that was 450 grams, so 45% of that. And how much did we apply? And we put 1.2 litres of that product on. And so it will do a calculation then to work that out in active ingredients per hectare. and you could change that if you only did it on part and so on, and you can make comments in that so that you can track if you've been doing other things. So that's a single product. You probably saw from the drop-down list here that there were a number of different pre-loaded herbicides in there, but they're only some of the more common ones. If there are herbicides that aren't listed there, just go to either other, which you've got here. And so let's, sorry, I'll put this one in first and I'll go back to that. All right, save and add another. So put glyphosate in. Let's say we used a bit of Secura as well because we wanted to pick up some of the annual grasses, and Secura is not in that list there. We'd go to other. You could write down this that you'd use Secura. Oops, sorry. As a herbicide there, it now asks you to actually enter the active ingredient because it's not preloaded into it. So in this case, the active ingredient in the product, I think it's an 850, so it'll be 0.85, sorry, 85% in that one, and you use about 125 grams. So we'll put that in there, and it will do the calculation of that other herbicide for you. Right, and I'll go save and go back. So I'll just put those two in. Actually, I'll put another one in. Let's say we do some MCPA later on for a few broadleafs. So MCPA amine we'll use on that to 75% on that one, and we might use half a litre. So put in 0.5 and it'll do the calculation on that as well. So you could see the way you just slowly build over time for the different products that you've applied. If they're not in the simple drop-down list, you've got to do a little bit more entering. But that's now entered those three in it. If you want to change those, you can go in and edit them again. As you look at some of those products there, it'll come up as 0 because it's calculated there in tons, and because you would have used so little of it, it doesn't show up here in just the way the numbers are listed, but it is actually in the calculation. So once we've got all of those in, that's the information that you need as part of that. We go back to our business activities, and of course, if then you'd had barley or you had canola or you had lupins or something else, you would repeat that for those other grains that you might have. So if you wanted to add another grain, you just press on add there, and then you can do exactly the same thing for another grain, set that up on the way through. So that's the main one. And in the cropping part of it, this is probably the main bit that takes the time, and the main bit that you want to try and get as right as possible, because your major emissions are calculated against the nitrogen fertilizer you use and that type of that nitrogen fertilizer and the herbicides. So getting those, as accurate as you can is pretty useful. So this tab is an important one to get right. There are two other tabs up here. One is the it's called energy and commodity consumption. So this is where you put your electricity in. And let's say this block that we've got, and so just to show you the way the electricity goes in, you can just read them off your bills if you like, when the bill started or over what period that was measured, the source of it, whether it's coming from renewables or non-renewables. So if you've got solar panels and that's what you're working off at home, you might have used that much power, but it will credit you with those no emissions of that because it's on renewables, and you put the amount in. But let's say this is an out block that doesn't have any power on it, and we're just cropping it. So there's no electricity that we've put in there. So we'll, sorry, cancel that one because we don't need to put that one in, but we've used some fuel. So in here, we've used some diesel. Those start and end dates are optional. You don't necessarily need to put them in, but this one you do. So let's say we've used some diesel, and let's say in growing all of this crop, we've used, I don't know, 3,500 litres of diesel as part of that. If you want to allocate a bit of petrol to it as well, you can do that. I'll just put that bit of diesel in there as part of it. Okay, and you obviously can do this for different blocks, but in something like this, when usually you buy it, it comes in at the tank, and you think, how am I going to keep a track of how many litres we used on this block or that block? What you can do is just list your whole fuel purchases over time, and I do these whenever I'm doing my BAS statement because I'm handling the fuel docket to get the diesel fuel rebate, so I actually know how many litres I'm using. So I just go and I just add another one in the next quarter, and just whatever that bill is for that quarter, I just add that volume in there as well. And it will add up the whole lot at the end. Once you've got that bulk commodity, you then go to this third little tab here, which is allocate to enterprises. And if you click on that, if you'd had multiple enterprises in there, you can split them across the enterprises. So in this case here, we've only got one enterprise. So how much have we put against the APW wheat? It'd be 100% because all of that fuel use has gone against that. But let's say if of that total fuel that you had in there, 50% was on wheat and 50% was on your canola, you would make an estimate of splitting those up. This is sort of less sensitive because it's the first calculation that's done is on the grains enterprise, and then it splits it down between individual crop types. But obviously, the more accurate you can get that, the more accurate and relevant your output's going to be. So we'll save that and go back. Okay, and so it says there that 100% of the product has been allocated. So if you go through and that only comes up as 80%, there'll be a warning that comes up to say you haven't allocated this across all the enterprises. So you make sure you've got that right. Okay, and once we've got all of those in, that's basically the data entry as far as you go. And we can now move to what those results would be as part of that. So we just quickly moved into this one. So you go down to the greenhouse calculations. Just doing hopefully a few calculations for us. Okay, now when it first comes up, I'll look like this and think, oh, it hasn't worked. But what we need to be mindful of is that the platform defaults to a set date in it, and you actually have to go back and put in the date that's relevant for your start and end time. So it doesn't pick that up to start with. So there are lots of choices here. Just click on custom on this one. And what we actually want is the start date, if people can remember, was April 2024 going through to March 2025. So because that's the 12-month period that we've entered our data in, and it can't do a 12-month run if you haven't got those start and end dates. So press update on that and it will recalculate, and it now produces these numbers. So the total emissions, and Sarah didn't touch on it, but the way when we're reporting greenhouse gas emissions, we talk about different scopes. Scope 1, in a nutshell, is the emissions that are produced within your farm boundary from running your operations and producing the products that you do. Scope 2 primarily relates to electricity in this case here, and because we didn't have any electricity because it was an outblock with no power on it, it's got 0 emissions associated with that. Scope 3 are the emissions that are associated up to the farm gate of the products that you use that have emissions associated with them in their manufacture or their refining. So there is a default calculation done for the refining, the collecting, extracting, and the refining of the fuel that you use, the manufacture of the different fertilizers that you use. So there are standards that are built into there. So that's why I said getting your accuracy around the fertilizer that you've used, the type and fertilizer that you've used, the herbicides that you've used, and so on, are all contributing to this scope 3 or pre-property emissions as part of that. And so it will calculate those different ones. So the total emissions for growing that crop over 250 hectares is about 111 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents. It will then break that down into how much of that comes from which commodities or which products, and whether they're scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3. And then we'll tell you which of those 3 gases they're coming from. So when we're reporting this stuff, we report it in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. Now, 2 of the other gases that aren't carbon dioxide, which is nitrous oxide and methane, both of those have a warming potential that is different to carbon dioxide. So there's a scaling or a multiplier factor that's applied to those 2 other gases that are produced, so that they can all be compared equivalent to what carbon dioxide would be. And I liken it to DSEs, which people will be familiar with. That, you know, one DSE is a 50 kilo dry sheep at condition score 3, maintaining weight. If a cow is 10 DSEs, it's eating 10 times more than what a sheep would be. So we have different ratings for them depending on, because they're different types of animals, but we try and break it down to some common denominator, and in this case here it's carbon dioxide equivalents. So you'll get that production. And the one that is, I think we want to concentrate on in agriculture is this one around emissions intensity. And the reason why I say that, and Sarah alluded to it at the start, supply chain, finance, and even government policy. So the last government land sector plan talks very much about emissions intensity, which is an efficiency measure. And the reason for that is that agriculture is not expected to be zero emissions. There's a recognition that because we have to feed and clothe people, that there will be some emissions associated with this. The goal for agriculture is to try and make that as efficient as possible. In other words, to produce the maximum amount of product we can for the minimum amount of emissions. And so emissions intensity is just to produce a ton of grain, in this case here, how many emissions are associated with it. And so that's what the emissions intensity number is telling you. And this is the number that the supply chain are now starting to look at, because the supply chain are saying, if I can buy from someone at lower emissions intensity than someone else, then when my product pops out the other end, it will be lower emissions because of the inputs that I've used, that we as farmers have produced for them, are lower emissions. So you can see over time how the market is going to start looking for people that are more efficient in their production. And comes back to a point that Sarah put on her slide. I've been surprised when I've been doing this with clients that our emissions intensity stack up incredibly well, as in already we're very efficient in what we do compared to similar producers around the world. And when you think that 70% of Australia's production out of agriculture is exported, this in the future could be a seriously important differentiation of what we can do, that we are a low emissions producer. So at first I was a little bit wary of it. The more numbers I've seen coming through, I'm going, we stack up pretty well in this game. We should actually be telling this story rather than trying to avoid telling this story, because we've got a good story to tell. So that's really the guts of it. I don't know, Alicia, if you wanted to stop there for questions.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or turn off your mic if you prefer. We do actually have one question. Do we have access to change the electricity emission factor for different country context, or is it exclusively for Australia?
Good question, and maybe Sarah might like to have a crack at this as well. We didn't mention it, but there is ongoing development of this platform as it goes. But the assumptions that are built in behind it are based on what is accepted as Australian standards, and changing those takes, to keep this, have a high degree of rigor and integrity with it. Changes aren't made unless there's really good evidence to be able to do so. But Sarah, did you want to say something?
Thanks, Cam. I actually might throw over to my colleague Aggie, who's on the line, just to answer this one. Aggie?
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so as Cam mentioned, the standards that guide where this all comes from, they are set by the Australian government. So right now the GAF tools are aligned with the National Inventory. And so a lot of those factors come either from the National Inventory, or other factors for Scope 3 come from international databases and research. So there is a process around updating those factors. There are new guidelines coming out in June next year, and those guidelines will set out essentially the recipe for the calculations that you are seeing in effect. So the calculations that tell you, how you should calculate the different scopes on farm, they will set out the recipe, and there will be options in terms of the methodology you use. So you will see where you have scope to change factors or use other factors, and where the government has said this is the factor that should be used. This is why it's coming from the national inventory and so forth. So at this stage, we reflect GAF. Every time GAF is updated, we update that, and then come June, we will be reflecting the guidelines. So where there are options for changing factors, you will have options, and where there are not options, then the government's default factors will apply. If you've got any more questions about that, want to get into specifics around how this will change because of the guidelines in June next year, just reach out, via the website. Sarah gets all of those directly. I'm very happy to jump on a call.
Thanks, Aggie.
Thank you. And there is another question. Can the tool calculate sequestration, e.g. tree planting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alicia, and thanks, Louisa, for the question. Yes, you can actually add, so if you've planted trees for purposes such as carbon sequestration or habitat rehabilitation, you can add an additional activity, which I don't know if Cam's able to show us now, which is called planting. So when you do that, you can actually, that'll show up in your business activities as a separate activity, and you can enter details about the planting that you've got there. So again, there's timeframes that you need to add in there, picking the region that you're in, and also then picking the relevant soil type and then species. So yes, the sequestration that is currently within the Greenhouse Accounting Framework or GAF tools relates to tree planting.
Okay, so I'll just go back to that now, Sarah. Sorry, I just have to get everybody's heads out of the way. So the buttons I need to press. Okay, so when you see here what kind of enterprises are run here, and it just takes a little bit of thinking. So if you're in, I'll show you two things. If you're in anything related to livestock, pasture is considered a enterprise. So if we scroll through some of the ones you can see here, we've got one that's called pasture. And that allows you to put your fertilizers and your herbicides and different types of pastures that you might be growing as part of that. And as Sarah said, in the land management one, you can enter one that's called planting. So when we think about the enterprises, we tend to think of what's the stuff that we're producing, but there are also, if you like, subsets of that, which can be your tree stuff that can be used for sequestration. It can be the some of the pasture that you sow. And how you manage that as well. So the livestock one doesn't automatically bring the pasture one in. You need to have pasture as part of that to be able to enter your fertilizer, lime, resowing, those sort of things as well. But while I'm here, sorry, Alicia, any other questions?
That's all for now. If anyone has any, please don't hesitate to keep on popping them in the chat.
Okay, thanks. I'll just spend just a couple of minutes here because I reckon what might happen, say an example like this, you've got this block, you've grown this wheat, we've grown a pretty good crop on it, but there's some value in the stubble. And you think, oh, wouldn't it be great? I'll go and buy some lambs. I'll buy some younger, lighter weight lambs, and I'll put a bit of weight on them and sell them. So I just want to do a trade. But you've already set this up to run a cropping operation starting in 1st of April, but all you need to do is come back into the edit property one, which is a little wheelie thing that's there, and you click on this one, and we could come into here and say, I want to bring some sheep into it. So you can always go back and add layers to it from what you've originally set up. So now I've got 2 business enterprises. So if I confirm that, I've now got 2 enterprises. When I go into my business activities, you'll see now that I've got a livestock one in here as well. And I'll go into add into this one, and just to step you through, and these are some trade lambs that we're going to buy. Okay, so we've got those, and the start date. I'll keep it consistent with the other one because you'll be able to see how this comes together. So we'll go April 24 to March 2025, and then we go to that. So that's set up a calendar. Now, the livestock one is a little bit more complicated. There is a breeding livestock tab and a trading livestock tab. The breeding herd is if you're in a self-replacing type operation where it ticks over from one year to the other, and there are different classes of livestock. So you tick those different classes of livestock on and off. So if you don't have some of these animals, you just don't, these classes of animals, you don't tick them on or off. And they are categorized by age years. So 0 to 12 months is one category, 12 months to 2 years. So 1 to 2 years is another category. Sorry, 13 months to 2 years is another category. And 25 months or greater than 2 years old is another category. So there are different categories, and that's all because of the way those animals grow and the rates at which they grow and so on. And you've got your male and females there. I'll go into the trading one rather than the breeding one, but the platform, the setup of it is exactly the same. So I'm just trading some lambs that I've got here. And let's say I'm buying some young ewe lambs that have just been weaned, so they've just come off mum. They've gone into market and I've gone and picked up some. So the simple way of entering it is you click on the button there and it will open up a monthly calendar for that class of livestock. Now, this looks really busy, but once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. And there is some work being done on this to try and improve the flow of it even further. But it's created a calendar for us starting in April. So it's March of the previous year. So that's April, which corresponds with the same dates that we've got for our cropping program and finishes in March 2025. And so let's say in this example here, move it out of the way again, which for some reason doesn't want to. Cute. So let's say in December, we've finished harvest and we go, gee, we've got some stubbles there. So you go in and purchase some animals. So you click on the add sales or purchases and it comes up as December 24. That's the month that we're buying it. We're buying lambs that are less than 12 months old. If you clicked on a number of different groups, you'd have a choice there in that class. We're purchasing them. And let's say we purchase 500 ewe lambs as part of that. Now, you can either enter the total weight of the animals or you can get them to calculate it. And let's say we're buying them and they're 30 kilos that we're buying them at. So they're lighter sort of lambs. And it will automatically do the calculation of the total amount of live weight. And there's a question here about whether they're merinos or not because of the behaviour is a bit different as far as some of the calculations go if they're pure merinos. But let's say we're talking about composite lambs that we've got here as part of that. And so you just go in, save and close. And what it will do is it will automatically then populate the number for each of the months unless you change that. And because it's only going to March that year, we've still got 500 in there. So you can see you've added 500 in there. So in January, we've got 500. You put in the weights of those animals. So the weight in, December when we bought them, that's right, was 30 kilos when we put them in. Let's say they gain 7.5, 8 kilos a day. So it'd be about 250 grams a day. So about 7 or 8 kilos in the month. Let's say that's 38 kilos. And then we go here and it might be about 45 kilos. And then in March when we're ready to sell, they might be, say, 52 kilos as that stubble runs out. If we're selling them, you just go over to the add sales or purchases button and it says it's March 2025 and this time it's a sale. And let's say we sell all 500 of them because none of them are died, which is really handy. And we get them to calculate that total weight because it was 52 kilos per head on average. And that gives us that sale weight as well. And we just put in save and close. And so we've now entered that data. If you've got deaths, you can change them. So let's say if we thought 5 had died or something, you just put -5 in there. And that then automatically changes from January to February for those deaths that have occurred. So it's a reasonably neat way of being able to try and reconcile your numbers as you go through for a year. This is the simplest, just a simple trade like that. We buy them and we sell them a few months later. You can imagine when you've got different classes of livestock in a breeding operation, there's a bit more added to it. But if we put all that in and then we go save and go back, we've entered all that information that we need. 2 other tabs that we've got on here. One is the amount of wool that's cut because there's an emissions intensity that can be calculated against the wool. And let's say we bought those lambs in, and the first thing is we knocked them off. We knocked the bit of wool off them. So the shearing took place, let's say, in January. And the sheep that we were shearing were these ewe lambs, less than 12 months old, in a trading operation. And let's say we shore all 500 of them that we had that came through in January. And let's say we cut a kilo of greasy wool off there. This one, just to be aware of, when it's entering the kilos of wool in here, this is the clean wool, not the greasy wool, and it's the total amount. So if we had 500 lambs that were cutting a kilo each on average, so it's 500 kilos greasy. If it was 60% yield on that, so the clean fleece weight, in total we will have cut 300 kilos of clean wool. So that one just probably needs a little bit of a calculation. I'll talk to the designers about that, because I reckon there's a step in there which could make sure we don't make mistakes in that one. But you pop that one in, save and go back. And then this last one here is if we've bought in any types of feed mixes to it. So whether they're mineral blocks, or in some cases here, if we're buying grain in or we're buying hay in, this comes into the crops for grazing, and you enter it in there, which we won't at the moment because we're just grazing the stubbles. So that's about as simple as we put all of this together. And so we've just got those, no animals in there. Whoops, sorry, treating livestock. That's entered in there. Your wool cuts entered in there as well. So you can add layers to it as the season goes on if circumstances change. So the beauty of it is you can set it up where the Excel tool, you need to basically have all that data calculated for that 12-month period to be able to enter it in once. This allows you to add new layers to it as you go along. And if we go to the emissions calculation again, and hopefully I haven't missed a step in my haste as it's doing the calculations. Okay, so this has got the dumb date on it there, so we'll change that to April 2024, update that. So it does our calculations. Now, as you can see, the calculations are much higher, and those calculations are much higher now because we've got two enterprises in the mix as well. So this is giving you the whole farm. It does give you the option then to split that apart and say, what is it for the grain and what is it for the sheep? So you saw the grain one before, so we'll go to the sheep one. So it'll do a calculation on your sheep, what's coming from scope 1 emissions, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. And what's interesting in this one is our scope 1 emissions, we've been really efficient in growing them when they're on the farm, but we've copped a reasonably heavy penalty because we've bought 30 kilo lambs that someone else has produced for us. And there's a default number in that at the moment. I can see, as Aggie and Sarah said, that over time, as people are able to supply those numbers, and you are buying 30 kilo lambs and one had double the emissions associated with it, to get the 30 kilos as another one, you may pay a bit more for the ones that are lower emissions intensity at a sale or at a purchase, because what flows through then in your final product at the end would be lower, because this scope 3 would be lower that you're actually buying in. And then it does the calculations. And unsurprisingly, most of it comes from methane, because that's where the issues are with livestock. And then you've got your emissions intensity both for the meat production and for the wool production. And so it picks up both of those as well. So that's been a very quick 40 minutes to sort of rip through it, Alicia, but I think hopefully that sort of covers off on the main issues. And you can export all of this data. You can press the button there and it will print that out for you. So I might leave it there, I think. Go back to the
Great,
start.
thank you, Ian. We do have one more question. Can the tool calculate carbon emissions / sequestration scenarios if we have one or more of soil operations? Not too sure what they mean there.
One or more soil operations.
Yeah, brackets tillage. Not too sure what they mean.
Sorry, Cam.
Yeah, I suspect that's associated with soil carbon, is it? Do you think, Alicia, it might be?
Yes, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, so at the moment, what's set up here doesn't include soil carbon, either calculations for sequestration of carbon or potential losses by some of those practices. So the only place tillage is really picked up in an emissions would be through the diesel that you'd use as an emission, but there's no calculation either in this one or in any of the GAF tools about changes in soil carbon.
Great, thank you, Cam. I think that's a great place to leave it. It's really great to see how the tool can really tie in all those different enterprises. Is there any more questions that anyone would like to have before we wrap up?
I've got one, Alicia. Just in terms of the setup, sorry, going back to the cropping scenario, are you better off, or have you seen people use a tool where they've set up individual paddocks? Thinking back, linking it back to that Ag World question that came in earlier, because obviously Ag World's set up in a lot of, different paddocks and different herbicides being used across different paddocks, rather than by sort of crop type, anyway, that's just an interest question for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So the simple answer is yes, I have seen it, Fiona, but it does become a very big database, as you can probably imagine. If I was splitting it up, my recommendation would be, say, if you've got APWE, as I said, in red wheat, I just split it up at that level because your inputs for those may be different in your fertilizer, herbicides, and so on that you might be using. But I have seen it. But where I think, and this is not a AIA endorsement as such, but I reckon a lot of those software companies, because this has an API, it's got that the application programming interface bit, that they'll want to use this as the engine and offer it in their programs, in their software. So I could see it sort of, in a sense, working the other way around. What you're seeing here will all happen in the background, and they'll put their nice label on it and say, look what our software can deliver, which I reckon is fine if it uses this as the engine, because this is going to have all the right assumptions. It's going to have the integrity of the calculations and what can be included and what can't be included. And I think if other software developers want to pick this up and think, how can I flow the information I collect at a paddock basis and either chunk it up or split it up depending on what's happening here, I think that's a fabulous outcome, even though people mightn't be using this platform directly.
Thanks, Cam. And Fiona, that's what we're seeing. We've got about 19 different organisations, including software and service providers, who are now using our engine to drive their calculations. So that's starting to happen, and that was the focus of the recent government grant awarded to AIA to support that consistency through all industry tools and calculators.
Great, thank you, Cam and Sarah. I will share my screen. We do have a survey that would be great if all participants could complete. Just bring that up now. If everyone could complete that, it would be greatly appreciated. But thank you so much to Cam and Sarah for your presentation today. I think it was really great, and hopefully everyone got a lot of takeaways out of it and can go and apply this in their own scenario.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thanks, Alicia. Bye.
Thank you.